Ladies and gentlemen, I'll tell you, I love this state. I was born, raised, educated here. The Maine people are some of the hardest working people in America. Yes, I'm a little bit off the cuff. You think I'm off the cuff, you wait to hear the next speaker. He's just the same brand. You know, America right now is being led by a president who's trying to fix America. I led Maine, trying to fix Maine. Matt Bevin runs Kentucky, trying to fix Kentucky. I didn't realize until this morning that I graduated high school the day he was born. So I'm on the other end of the spectrum, and he's the young buck, and he's a great friend. The thing I like about this man, he's a great dad, a really great dad. He's a great American. He's a great husband. He's a great governor. Ladies and gentlemen, you cannot have a better friend than Matt Bevin. So please welcome the governor of Kentucky.
Thank you very much. Your legs are getting good exercise here today. Thank you for being here. Just lost a few dishes in the back, but how about, in all seriousness, how about a round of applause to the men and women who made this possible? Every tablecloth, every glass filled, every meal on the tables. Thank you. And before I forget, I took this out. This is a visual representation of what's on the back of all your programs. I took it was on a room in there where the Legacy Circle was meeting. I think that was the name of the group. The sponsors. If you would just take your brochure with you, look at the back of that thing, and if it's a business, spend time, supporting these people. They're yourselves, they're your friends. Some of you are here, but these are people who took the time to put their money behind this organization, the Maine Heritage Policy Center, and the ideas, the principles that it stands for. And again, our dollars speak, they really do, not only in terms of your generosity in supporting but supporting these folks who also share your ideology. I think it's important to do so. I was asked earlier, I was on a couple of radio programs here in Maine this morning, and somebody said, give us a synopsis of your speech. I said, whoops, I better get one. And then earlier somebody said, well, we look forward to what you're going to be saying. And I said, well, so do I, actually. I don't write speeches. I mean, I'm also a little off the cuff. I try to use a little more tact and diplomacy than some people. I'm just saying. I try. I don't always succeed, but I try. I've been accused of not succeeding. But the reality is this. I just want to speak to you for a few minutes, just from the heart on several things. And in fairness, let me back up just a little bit and tell you sort of my background, because it is odd. It's an honor for me to be here, and I'll tell you why as I tell you a little of my background. It's odd for me to be the governor of a state, or of anyone to be, of a state that I wasn't born in, didn't grow up in, didn't go to school in, and people wonder, how did that happen? Especially, this is the first political job I've ever had. I've never been in politics. I never worked for a politician. I never worked on a campaign. So how does a kid who grew up in northern New Hampshire near Mount Washington end up becoming the governor of a state like Kentucky? I grew up one of 6 kids, second of 6 kids, over in Coos County, just over the border from Oxford County. My dad did many different things when I was a kid. Worked in a shoe factory, worked at a McDonald's, worked in a warehouse. Most of my life, he worked at a little wood mill on the flats in West Bethel, Maine, called Newton Tibbetts. It was a little dowel mill. It's out of business now. But Paul knows where it is, and or was. It was a simple job. My dad worked at an hourly wage. It was minimum wage, maybe a little bit better. But he was grateful for the job. He had, a family of 8 to feed. Didn't go a long way, obviously. I don't think he ever made 20 grand a year in his life. It's neither here nor there, other than to say some of the things that have been talked about opportunity, about the power of one person and what one person can do. This is true. You think about how blessed we are in America. You think about just the fact that how we opened here, to be able to pledge our allegiance to a flag, one nation under God, indivisible. Just that we can say that with confidence, that it has been a reality. The fact that whether you're people of faith or not, that we can open a gathering like this with an invocation, praying publicly, unashamedly, expressing our faith, not worried about how we'll be attacked for that, whether or not that's even acceptable. How fortunate we are to be Americans in the 21st century. And I look at how I was raised in a simple financial world. I was struck by a couple things that Peter said, even as you talk about the principles of individual possibility, and that Milton Friedman was a great espouser of these things. It's true. In America, anyone had an opportunity. And I was grateful to have been raised with an appreciation for God and country, respect for people, and a belief in the American way of doing things. It's interesting because when I was a teenager, and incidentally, I'll get to it in a second, but I had a chance to graduate, I'll just tell you now, from a private school in Bethel, Maine. So I actually graduated from high school in Maine, even though I lived in New Hampshire. And I went as a day student. My dad worked 7:30 to 3:30 at Newton Tibbetts, and a couple miles away was a little school called Gould Academy in Bethel, Maine. They were very generous to my family. My parents obviously didn't have any money to send their kids there, but I was able to go there. They provided me a little more than half of the financial aid that I needed for the tuition. I went as a day student, as I said, and I was able to earn the rest of it. My best friend, actually, growing up in those years that I was in school, is actually here. Marty Groman is known to some of you. He's worn the hat of a Democrat and an independent, but he's really a Republican in there. He's just trying to, deep inside, he's a pretty fiscally responsible guy. But Marty and I shared a page in the yearbook the year we graduated. We were best friends. He was another kind of poor kid who came out of the woods of Dixfield, Maine. I came out of the woods of Shelburne, New Hampshire. We both found ourselves as day students at a school that was willing to give kids like us a shot. And folks like you have supported schools like that have supported opportunities for kids like us. That's the greatness of America. I remember asking myself during those years, I was a teenager, I asked my dad one time why we didn't take the government cheese, because I don't know if that was what it was officially called. That's what we all called it. It came in these brown cardboard boxes, these rectangular boxes, and it seemed like everybody we knew had it and ate it, and it was good, actually. We liked it. We ate it at our friend's house. We wanted it. I asked my dad, I said, why don't we take the government cheese? And I'll never forget what he told me. He didn't say it in a way to knock the cheese or the program or anyone who might take it, but he just said simply, don't ever take something that you didn't earn. What a powerful message. How blessed I was personally to have been told this. You think about the name of this policy center, Maine Heritage. What is the heritage of this state? This state that was founded in 1820 in terms of its independence, but goes all the way back to the Massachusetts Bay Colony. When the heritage that built this state, the entrepreneurialism, the willingness to take risk, this is the heritage we're talking about protecting. This is where I'm grateful to have come from, to have been raised in this way. I graduated from high school. I went off to college in Virginia, a little school called Washington and Lee University. I went from there into the military. I was an active duty Army officer for a number of years. Didn't make a career of it, got out a little more than 25 years ago, 7 years ago now. And when I got out of the service, I went into the private sector. And what I've done since that time prior to that was pay taxes. That's what so many of you in this room do. You pay taxes, you raise your family. I'm married, I have 9 children, which I could tell by the reaction of a couple of you. None of you knew that, actually. Or some of you clearly didn't. But it is funny. When people don't know you have 9 children, it sometimes takes them aback a little bit. My wife and I, we had 5 children, and then we adopted a 6th child, and in the course of adopting him, learned of a sibling group of 3 other kids that needed a home. I'll digress for one quick second and say it's not necessarily something that'll come out of this policy center, although it could and maybe it should. But I'll tell you what, it's a problem in Maine, it's a problem in Kentucky, it's a problem everywhere in America. We are failing hundreds and hundreds of thousands of kids in America, failing them. And they end up being a part of the very networks. and I use that word loosely, that this policy center and others try to come up with policies to figure out how to put broken adults back together again. People coming out of addiction, people coming out of homelessness, people coming out of prison. But the reality is 70% of all the people in prison in the United States, 70% have been touched by, because they were in some way, shape, or form involved in the foster care system. Think about that. We fail them when they're young, and then we get shocked when they're broken. And we spend a whole lot of time and money and resources trying to put them back together again. And I would encourage you to think about the kind of things that can be done. Whether you're in a position to do something personally or help others that can. There's so much that needs to be done. So much that needs to be done. I was asked to share with you a little bit about kind of the things we've done in Kentucky, and I will do that. But before I get to that point again, just to finish kind of how did I find myself in the political arena. Just to finish the previous point I was making, we had adopted the one, learned of this sibling group of 3 children. They were 10, 7, and 2. It's hard to find a home for 3 kids at once, especially when the oldest is double digits. Most people want little kids. But as any of you that are from a big family know, once you have 6, 9, really, you know, what's the difference at that point? I mean, it's not a tremendous amount of fun. I will say this, you do lose between 6 and 9 any possibility of driving a vehicle that could be perceived by anyone as being cool. I do that is lost. There is you leave, if the Suburban has the potential to be cool, that's out the window. That's gone. So you then end up in like the church van or the shuttle bus. It's one of those two. But beyond that, how fortunate we are. My kids are 20 down to 9 years old. But I found myself some years ago, and this is the only thing that I'm going to read to you. This was something I sent to somebody. I looked around, and I was in Kentucky as a business guy. I employed people in my state and in a number of other states as well, including this state, where through the years I've had businesses that I've owned outright or partially owned. Even now, employing a lot of people, have generated millions of dollars in payroll for people here in Maine. It's very near and dear to my heart. It really is. This is where I grew up, in this part of the world. And I appreciate the work ethic that was talked about, the very things that really set this state in motion. But this was something I wrote as I looked around about 5, 6 years ago. And I looked at what was happening in America, and I saw us asleep at the wheel. And I said, the greatest threat we have in this country, frankly, isn't this policy or that policy, although they're death by 1,000 cuts. It isn't necessarily this elected individual or that one. It isn't this party or that one. It isn't these specific ideas or those. The greatest threat is, frankly, our apathy, that we are so blessed. Think about even this meal, this environment, this, temperature-controlled room that we're in, just the setting, the company, the ability to come and go. 99% of the people who've ever lived in the world will never experience a meal in an opportunity in a couple of hours like we're experiencing right now. And we can afford to take this for granted because every one of us may have the same opportunity multiple times this week or month or year. Think about that. How fortunate we are. We have the luxury, ironically, of being able to not care. And so often we don't. You look at what happened in the last election in this state. If more people who thought like those in this room had turned out to vote, if more people truly stepped up, yes, games were played with how counts were accumulated. But the reality is this, if people who thought like we did, individual liberty and responsibility and freedom, actually came out to vote, a good turnout is 50% turnout. That's considered a good turnout. Only about 6 in 10 people that are eligible to vote ever even bother to register, which means a good turnout really is 3 out of 10 people. We talk about of and by and for the people. It only works if the people get engaged. It only works if we the people, which is written on the back right here, for crying out loud. We the people. We the people, we're it. If only 3 in 10 of the people bother to exercise the greatest gift that any peoples on the face of the earth in history have ever been given, then shame on us. Our founders duly noted that one of the dangers of a democratically elected government, and yes, we're a republic, but we're democratically elected. One of the dangers is that ultimately you get the government you deserve. Indeed, that's a swift kick in the teeth to some of us. It's a splash of cold water, but it's true. It's true, we get what we deserve, and sometimes due to our own apathy. And so I wrote a letter to somebody, and it was somebody, forgive the sort of sound, somewhat, religious kind of sound to it. I wrote it to a person who was in the faith-based community. And he was somebody who I had heard speak about the need for people to do this, that, or the other thing. And I just wrote him a letter. It was somebody I knew decently, but not real well. And truth be told, the answer I got back, or lack thereof, really spurred me to say somebody has to step up. I was struck by, Julia, your comment about your mom saying she never believed one person could change the world. I'll come back to that in a minute. It's a powerful point. It's a powerful point. And I wrote this letter to this man. I said, many wonder why evil prevails in the world. It prevails, as Edmund Burke noted, when good men do nothing. And again, this is a person in the faith-based community, so he'd appreciate these analogies that I'm asking him. We said, where are the Daniels? Where are the Gideons? Where are the Joshuas? They were all men of prayer, but they were also men of action. Where are those who would stand with such men when they do step forward? I was reading recently in Exodus 14 about the Israelites as they left Egypt. I was struck by something in verses 15 and 16. God chastised Moses for simply crying out to him for help. He commanded Moses to take action. You and I both know full well that God did not really need help from Moses to part the Red Sea. But he made clear that simply praying for deliverance was not enough. God demanded more. And God demands no less of his people today. Boldness and courage have been largely replaced by apathy, and it is destroying the fabric of our nation. How much longer will we still be one nation under God, indivisible, the very things we just pledged a moment ago, if we fail to take action in order to preserve that which has long made us exceptional? We have an historic opportunity to infuse a sense of personal responsibility back into the American electorate. And I would submit to you, digressing for a moment, the same thing could be said about the Maine electorate. This race, I wrote to him at that time, is a battle for the heart and soul of the entire electoral process. Will we indeed be a government of and by and for the people, or will we stand idly by as the process is hijacked by those who believe it to be of and by and for a few? Those few for whom power often trumps principles. There is still great opportunity before us in America, but as Thomas Edison astutely noted, most people in life miss opportunity because it usually shows up in overalls and looks like hard work. The path that our nation is not a good one. Is not a good one. It will not correct course on its own. It will take hard work. Each of us must decide then what we are willing to do about it. Where are the Daniels? And I wrote this at that time, never having had so much as a bumper sticker on my car for a politician, never having knocked the door or made a phone call for a politician. I had written checks. I had reached out on certain advocacy related to certain policy, but I had not truly been engaged, not even to the degree that you all are by being present here today. But I paid taxes, and I raised a family, and I saw the apathy destroying this nation, and I said, somebody, surely there's somebody. I always hope to find somebody to step up. And think about this, the somebody's always somebody. There is always a somebody. It may be a somebody you like and support. It may be a somebody that you dislike and don't support, but there will always be a somebody. And who are any of us, myself included, I found myself thinking, to assume that in the course of our lives, we can always hope for a somebody, always support a somebody when they do come forward, always bemoan the lack of a somebody when they don't. But who am I to think I get to live my life in the 21st century in America and never have to be the somebody? Who am I that I get to ride the shoulders of everybody that preceded me? The 1.5 million Americans who've died in this nation's uniform in service to this nation, giving literally every last ounce. Who am I to think that I don't have to step up? I get to ride the coattails. And I would submit to you, this is something I would challenge you to think about. I wasn't asked to ask you to give to this at all, in fact, but I'm going to reiterate things that were said by two people that preceded me on this stage. This is where things get changed. When you come together, when you gather together, you've already given, you wouldn't be here. But every one of you can look around this room, you can look around your table, and you know 3, 5, 10, 20, 50 people who could have been, should have been, might have been in this room, that you could invite to be in this room next year, that should be supporting this. How much would they give? How much would you give to go back 6 months or however long it's been now and get a mulligan on this last election? The reality is, what is it worth for good government? A government of and by and for the people. And if not a price that you're willing to pay now, when? What are you holding out for? And I found myself looking at the landscape and saying, somebody needs to step up. There were 3 people in my primary. 3 people that were running already on the Republican side. I'm a Republican. There were 4 running on the Democrat side when I ran in 2015. I knew the 3. I went to the first Lincoln Day dinner, and I heard all 3 of them. The filing deadline had not yet come. I filed, incidentally, with 2 hours before the filing deadline. It was not well received by certain people that had been in the race for a while. But that said, I was also a nobody, and nobody gave me any chance. And during the course of that primary, and I went to hear them speak, and I just realized that somebody needed to step up, because while they were good people and I liked them personally, they weren't willing to be like Governor LePage. They weren't willing to break eggs and make hard decisions in the face of tremendous opposition, and that's what we needed in Kentucky. It's frankly what is needed in many places in America. And so I filed with 2 hours before the deadline, and in the course of that primary, I was the only candidate of the 4. The guy, incidentally, who came in 4th stepped down off the state Supreme Court to run, so there was no goofballs. I mean, they were all serious people. They were all intentionally trying to win and all qualified in some respects. I was the only one that got no endorsement or support from any Republican, even though I'm a Republican and had been my whole life. Not one elected official at any level, not even a local magistrate, endorsed or supported me in my primary. Neither here nor there, other than to say that I wasn't expected to win. I ended up just saying, listen, I could just worry about polls and this or that, which I didn't, or I can just go out and outwork people. It's interesting, Abraham Lincoln, a famous son of Kentucky, once said something that I think is an encouragement, a hope to you all as people who believe good policy matters, and that good things can come, and that the state can be re-seized, and that opportunity still lies before us here in a state like this, in Maine. Abraham Lincoln said, good things may come to those who wait, but only the things left behind by those who hustle. And so I decided, you know what, I'm just going to out-hustle these other people. I ended up winning, and some of you may know this, in what was the closest statewide election in the history of America. I won a statewide election. Of course, it was recounted, and it went on for days, and ultimately the final tally was that I won a statewide election by less than 4/10,000ths of 1%. If you think your vote doesn't matter, it matters. I'm telling you. We have 120 counties in Kentucky. I won a statewide election by 83 votes. So you think about it. That's not districts, that's counties. Less than 1 vote per county, about 2/3 of a vote per county. So, of course, in the general election, people assumed I had no shot, especially because I ran on, and this is where I'll dovetail, to the kind of things that are possible here, because people assumed they weren't. I'm only the 4th Republican in 100 years to be elected the governor of Kentucky, and never in the history of Kentucky has there ever been a consecutive Republican. Not 2 following each other, not 1 following themselves. There have never been 2 terms in a row of a Republican in the history of Kentucky. So trying to do things was considered not likely to begin with, but then I specifically ran on something I called a blueprint for a better Kentucky. And I won't take you through all of it other than to say that I had put into writing, and I was the only one willing to do it, things that I believed people could handle. I was told they're all third rails, don't touch them. If you talk about those things, you'll never get elected. If you somehow were able to win, maybe you can pick 1 or 2 of them, but you'll probably use a lot of political capital, so be very careful. Then I said, you know what, I trust that we're smarter than that, more capable than that. And so I'm going to put all these things in writing, and if people can't handle it, I don't want to be the governor of a state that's not willing to do the things that need to be done. So I put out what I called this blueprint for a better Kentucky. There were 7 things, one of which was to make us a right-to-work state, one of which was to repeal prevailing wage, to cut the size of government, to push back on over-regulation coming from the federal government, synonymous with the previous point. Addressing pension reform, modernizing our tax code, bringing school choice, because we were one of only 7 states in the entire country that had 0 competition for public education dollars. These were the types of things that I put in writing. Every one of them While I'm a socially conservative person, there were no social issues because, as I've often said, and it's sadly true, those issues become somewhat moot if you're insolvent financially. If the state cannot sustain itself, those things become secondary, whether they should be or not. So I put these things out there, and everyone said, well, your time is done. Every poll that was ever taken during that general election 4 years ago, every single poll said I had no chance of winning. I was outside the margin of error. Every expert, every crystal ball, the Larry Sabatos, the Charlie Cooks, the Stuart Rothenbergs, whatever their names, all these people, all the experts, all said I was going to lose. The closest I ever was down 5%, plus or minus margin of error of 3, outside the margin of error. I ended up winning by over 9%. The reality is this. You decide. The pollsters don't decide. The media doesn't decide. We, the people, decide. We, the people, decide. It's the same for Maine. People said, how in the heck could you possibly get elected? It wasn't even that. I wasn't from Kentucky, and you can bet millions of dollars were spent reminding people of that. I wasn't just a carpetbagger. I was a Yankee carpetbagger. That's like the most, that's the most evil kind of carpetbagger, incidentally. Just if you're not aware of the hierarchy of carpetbaggers, that's like the Dante's 7th level of carpetbaggers or something. But anyway, all that to say, here I am. And what have we done since then? In my very first budget, people said, well, you know, are you going to really try to implement a cut? I said, yeah. I said, we can't afford, we cannot afford to continue down this path of fiscal irresponsibility. We can't. And so I had good people, well-intentioned people, thoughtful people encouraging me to, hey, well, if you think you want to get 1 or 2%, maybe if you want 1%, maybe ask for 2 or 3, and then we'll work backwards and maybe we'll get 1%. I said, oh, I don't want 1%. I said, I want, 3, 4, 5%. They said, oh, you'll never be able to cut state government like by that much and like right out of the chute. That's tough because you're going to kill it for Republicans. That's too much. And then I said, well, if you really truly think that if to get 3, if you want 1, you got to go with 2 or 3. If I want at least 3, I said, then I'm going to go for 9. How's that? 9%. And they said, well, that's crazy. I said, well, the wonderful thing about 9 psychologically, it's just better. It's like when something's on sale. It's $9.99. I mean, it's a bargain. And seriously, we're all just grown-up kids. We're easily tricked. And so we are. We pretend we're not. We pretend we're more savvy than that, but we're all creatures of the same habits in many respects. And so I put it out there. Well, guess how much we cut state government in the very first term? 9%. Why? Because we put it out there, and then we stuck with it, and we hammered it home, and I didn't move off it. And on other things like the opioid crisis, for example, which has afflicted this state and has afflicted our state, ours is the only state where now you can only get a 3-day limit on your first initial prescription. 3 days. I wanted, why it's 3? Because I wanted 0, and the medical association wanted 10, and we ended up settling on 3. We split the difference, and it was closer. But to me, here's my point in saying these things. I realize that's a digression from what we were just talking about, which is fiscal things, but these are things that afflict us. These are things where leadership matters. This is why who you elect matters. The wonderful thing, I'll be honest, it's great. It is so cathartic not to need a political job. One of my former math teachers is here in the room, actually, and he can tell you it wasn't likely that I was going to set the world on fire from a mathematical perspective. You're probably shocked that I've turned out to be as mathematically inclined as I have. Interestingly, most of my life I spent in the investment management world, managing billions of dollars for retirement plans and foundations and things of that sort, in addition to a number of other businesses that I've started or owned. So ironically, I paid more attention in my algebra class with my former teacher than not. I won't single him out in case he was trying to be here anonymously. But all this to say that policy matters, coming out of a policy center like this, coming out of the minds of people like you, coming out of your checkbooks, coming out of your votes in the ballot box. It matters. And putting people in place who are willing to make bold decisions matters. Some of the things that we've done, we have seen record level unemployment, which is wonderful, but so have a lot of people. More critically to me, we have the highest levels of workforce participation we've ever had. We've seen an uptick because we too had way too many able-bodied working-age men and women not going to work who could. We are now a right-to-work state. We have repealed prevailing wage. We do have school choice, although it's still in its fledgling infancy, trying to get that thing funded and off the ground. We've gotten rid of a variety of rules and regulations. A number of you are wearing these buttons. This is something I started. This is actually a button that we created in Kentucky. It's cutting through red tape. We've cut 27% of all the regulations, amended or completely eliminated 27% of all the regulations that existed when I was elected 3.5 years ago. And we're just getting started. We're continuing to plow through them. I set up a website, redtapereduction.com. I invited everyone in the public, tell us what's redundant, what's unproductive, what's not working, and we'll address those things. These things can be done, but you've got to elect men and women that are bold. And I would encourage you, again, I'm somewhat preaching to the choir in this room, but we need far more shepherds and far fewer sheep. And we need to pour into young people. Julia, I'll tell you, as a dad, I'm sitting next to your dad, what a wonderful introduction. Truly, what a wonderful introduction. And really and truly, it was incredible. There's nothing that warms a father's heart more than to hear good, thoughtful, conservative, common sense things coming out of the mouths of their own children. Really and truly. I mean, I was moved to tears almost on your dad's behalf. I wasn't looking at him. I didn't want to look over and maybe find the same thing. But it was awesome. It really was. And here's the thing. Why are we doing this? It is for this next generation. Julie is on average, look at the average age in this room. We're a lot more gray hair than she does. This is why Paul was kind enough to call me a young guy. Heck, once you're playing, once you're in the second half century in life, you're playing on the back nine. Don't kid yourself. So you're kind to call me young. I like to think it's a state of mind. But I'll tell you what, I'm going tomorrow to a funeral of a friend of mine, 60 years old. 60 years old. He was killed in an accident. It was unexpected nonetheless. We don't know how much time we have. We don't. So how badly do you want the better Maine that drew you to this room today, that draws you to support the Maine Heritage Policy Center? How badly? Because some of you did write a check for this meal. This is their biggest fundraiser, their only real fundraiser. But some of you paid the price of admission, and it was not a small price, so thank you for doing it. But there are many in this room who quite literally could have put an extra zero on the front side of the decimal point, and it would not change your life. You could. You gave 50, you could have given 500. You gave 500, you could have given 5,000. You gave 5,000, you could have given $50,000. And I would encourage some of you to think about it, because the question I ask you, how badly do you want a better Maine? This is the average, I'm telling you something this is the average oldest citizen in the country is the average citizen in Maine. Why is that? Because old people like shoveling snow? No, not really. The reality is because the young people are leaving. The kids like me, I left this part of the world when I was 18 years old to find opportunity. I still own a home in Maine. I spend time there. My kids have grown up there in the summers because it still matters to me to come here. But we want opportunities where people like myself and Marty and others can stay here. He's managed to stay here, make a living. Not every kid has that opportunity. That's what we want. Winston Churchill, we just celebrated the 75th anniversary of D-Day. Winston Churchill, a man pretty famous during that period of time of being a shepherd, of being somebody who was bold and unafraid, who stepped up, willing to make hard decisions. He was called many things. He was not exactly a humble guy. But one thing he did push back on, though, was a moniker that was given to him. He was often called the Lion of England. And he said, listen, I'm not the Lion of England. He said, the people of England are the lion. He said, but history is called upon me to deliver the roar. It's a powerful statement. A moment ago, somebody made mention, and I forget who it was, that there is no white knight in the wings waiting to save the state of Maine. You know why? Because you're the white knight. You're the white knight. You're the Lion of Maine. History is calling upon you to deliver the roar. Your children, your grandchildren are calling upon you to deliver the roar. I'm assuming you came here because you want a better Maine, you want a better America, you want a better opportunity and a future for your kids. You want kids like myself and yourself to be able to pursue the American dream and to have as good a shot at it as we did and those that preceded us do. But the question I'll leave you with is this: how badly do you want it? Really and truly, how badly do you want it? Because it's not going to be handed to you on a silver platter, and it's not going to come without a price. Because when our founders set this nation in motion, and they pledged their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor, that wasn't a campaign slogan. That wasn't something that went on a bumper sticker. Every one of them pledged those things. They gave those things. They gave some, or in some cases, all of those things: their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor. Who are we to think that we're the first generation that isn't expected to give some modicum of the very same thing? Who are we to think we don't have to give some modern-day equivalent of our lives, fortunes, and sacred honor? You think about the people who settled this, who landed on this coast and up and down in this region of the Massachusetts Bay Colony 400 and some odd years ago, or thereabouts. They came here risking everything, including their lives, for the individual freedom and the liberty and the things that are espoused by this foundation that we have in such luxury that we can, as we said earlier, afford to be apathetic and not even care about and assume that it'll just continue to go on. Do you want it as badly as those men and women do? Most of them died in transit or shortly after arrival, hoping their kids would have a better shot. Do you want it that badly? Do you want it as badly as the men and women, who helped to set this nation in motion, and the men who were with George Washington at Valley Forge, the winter of 1776? You talk about cold, snowy winters. If they were lucky enough to even have shoes, they ate their shoes to keep from starving to death. We think, oh, that was then. Heck, have you paid attention to what's happening in Venezuela? They're eating the animals in the zoo. They're eating their pets. The average person in Venezuela last year lost 20 pounds. This isn't just something we read about in a storybook. That's the difference between good policy and bad policy. That's the difference between individual freedom and liberty and opportunity and socialism that believes a little more of your money in someone else's pocket is the answer. That's the difference that a policy center makes in terms of implementing change and getting people elected. Do you want it as badly as somebody willing to eat their shoes? We did just celebrate the 75th anniversary. You think about those guys stepping off those transport carriers on Omaha Beach 75 years and a month ago. Think about it. They were standing ankle deep in their own vomit. They saw their buddies dead on the beach who landed just seconds before them. The ocean was running red with their blood. And they poured wave after wave after wave onto that beach. And there was cliffs, and there were machine guns dug in, and they were getting mowed down, and they still kept coming, knowing that they wouldn't even likely get up the beach in some cases. Then they'd have to climb a cliff. Then they'd have to take out a machine gun nest, and then they'd have to march hundreds of miles inland to a country that wasn't even their own to bring freedom and liberty and individual possibility to people like themselves who weren't themselves, while leaving their own families at home. Do you want it that badly? Seriously. Because if we don't want it that badly, we don't deserve it. We don't. We say we want a better America. You say you want a better Maine. I say I want a better Kentucky. We want better opportunities. How badly? How badly do you want it? Because if there is not something inside of you that's willing to say, you know what? Yes, I'm blessed, and I can afford to go play golf and go out and enjoy the lake or whatever the case might be, and I've done my part for the year. Have you? Have you really? What are we leaving to those behind us? My high school yearbook quote, which, again, there was a picture of me and Marty on the page, which already made it a bit of a loser page to begin with, let's be honest, but that said, each of us had a quote, and my quote was by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. And Henry Wadsworth Longfellow said, "Lives of all great men remind us we can make our lives sublime. And departing, leave behind us footsteps on the sands of time." What footsteps are you leaving Because whether you're aware of it or not, you are leaving footsteps. You're following somebody's footsteps. Whose footsteps are you following, and who's going to follow you? And is where you are going worthy of somebody following? Are they going to be able to take it to some new summit, some new mountaintop? The final thing I'll say is this. I am a person of faith. It is an important part. My Judeo-Christian faith informs my worldview. I'm unapologetic about it. Not everybody shares it. But it certainly informs my life as a husband, as a father, as a business person. It informs my worldview as a governor. I believe in prayer, and I pray for my children. You often hear when people are in times of crisis or need or catastrophe, they ask people of faith to pray. Why do they do that? Because there's power in that. And I do pray for my 9 children for 2 very specific things. I'll share them with you, and then I'll sit down. It's the same prayer that I would have for you, for the people of Maine, for the people of America, for people who care about the future. I pray that my kids will know the difference between right and wrong. That's the first thing. Because I'll tell you, we live in a muddled world. Muddled would be a kind word. It's so mixed up. Up is down and in is out and right is wrong. I mean, the reality is you kids are given so many conflicting messages. These devices, my gracious, they inundate our children with a wealth of information and a dearth of knowledge. There's so little wisdom and discernment and knowledge, but there's so much information. And we don't teach our children well enough how to process it. And I pray and do my best to teach my children the difference between what is right and wrong. Whether it is a late night email with the subject line, Milton Friedman was the greatest, or whatever the case might be. Each of us in small ways and in large ways. You know, this is our responsibility. I pray that my kids will know that difference. The second thing I pray for is this. It's what my prayer is for each of you, for this state, for your leadership, those of you in business, that you don't just know the difference between right and wrong, but that you have the courage to do the right thing, because often that's the hardest part. Sometimes it's easy to know the difference between right and wrong. Sometimes that's the easiest part of all. The courage to do it is the tougher part. You have some wood to chop here in Maine. You do. But Lord knows, if there's people in America who know how to chop wood, it's the people of Maine. So in all seriousness, all euphemism aside, you know, this is truly a time of action. It's a time for men and women to step up, to find 1, 3, 5, 10, 20 people like yourselves, to write bigger checks, encourage other people, because there's strength in numbers. Policy can change. If you think it doesn't, look at our state. Again, 4th Republican in 100 years. When I was elected, we had 44 out of 100 seats in our state house. 44 were on the Republican side. The rest were Democrats. They had controlled the state house uninterrupted for 95 straight years when I was elected, since 1920. Uninterrupted, supermajorities. They dictated the policy. They dictated the spending, all of it. And when I was elected, people said, there's no chance, that'll never change, maybe 1 or 2 or 3 in your term, and if a next term, maybe another 1 or 2, and eventually in 10 years or so, we might get the House. Nonsense. One person taking point, one person stepping up, one person leading the charge. One person having the courage to do what is right can make a powerful difference. Yes, you'll get hated. Your previous governor understands it. You'll be despised. People will make snarky bumper stickers about being, part of the, 68% or whatever. All the idiots. Who cares what idiots think? Really, who cares? If you've lived your life for the opinion of ill-informed people, you've wasted it. So don't worry about those people. But I would say this. In my first year, I said, you know what? I don't want to go around with my arm tied behind my back. Maybe we're never expected to have control of this house. I did 115 different meetings on behalf of candidates. I helped, like those in this room. Some of you could be the people. Some of you could find the people. Who are the men and women to step up to run for the state house, to run for the Senate, who are worthy, who are qualified, who are capable and willing to step up, who are the somebodies that will step forward, and you're the somebodies that will help them. We went from 44 when I was elected, a year later, 64 people in our state house. 64. One election. My point being, and again, I'd love to tell you that that everybody's a genius and they're all brilliant. They're not. But my point is this, then the possibility of change comes. It is possible in this state. It can be done. You've seen it done. by your previous governor who came in and against great opposition and great odds, made change happen. You are here in support of a policy center that believes it, that espouses it, that speaks on this and writes about this on a daily basis. Get behind them, because whether you want to or not, you're leaving footsteps on the sands of time. You want a better Maine? How badly do you want it? Thank you.